A chill permeated the air, a damp, clinging cold that burrowed into bone. It wasn't the kind of cold that invigorated, this was the cold of absence, of something vital having been ripped away. Elara wrapped her threadbare cardigan tighter around her, the worn wool offering little comfort against the biting wind that swept through the desolate streets. The city was a skeletal remains of its former self, a monument to a silence that had fallen like a shroud. It had been 187 days. Not that she counted with any conscious effort anymore, the number merely existed, a dull ache in the back of her mind, a constant hum beneath the surface of her waking thoughts. 187 days since the screens flickered, since the last broadcast choked on static, since the frantic shouts of neighbors had faded into an echoing quiet. No one knew why. No one had ever found out. One moment, the world thrummed with life, chaotic and vibrant, the next, it was as if a giant hand had simply pressed pause on humanity. Elara moved through the ruins with a practiced grace born of necessity. Her worn boots found familiar paths amidst the rubble, her eyes scanning for anything. Not food, not water, those were precious, meticulously hoarded. She sought echoes. A discarded child's toy, a half-written letter, a single, forgotten shoe. Each discovery was a morbid comfort, a testament that others had once existed here, breathed this same air, held similar hopes. Her apartment, a small, dusty sanctuary on the third floor of a decaying building, offered only a semblance of safety. The windows were boarded up, allowing only slivers of gray light to filter in. Every night, she pushed a heavy bookshelf against the door, a futile gesture, she knew, but one that quieted the incessant whispers of her own fear. The silence was the worst torment. It amplified every creak of the building, every rustle of wind, transforming them into phantom footsteps, imagined voices. Her days were a monotonous cycle of scavenging and solitude. She'd wake with the first hint of dawn, a faint glow behind the boarded windows. A few sips of rainwater, a meager portion of a stale cracker, and then out into the desolate expanse. She avoided the main thoroughfares, opting for the narrow alleys and crumbling backstreets, places where the ghosts felt less oppressive. The lingering scent of decay, the rusted husks of abandoned cars, the silent, gaping doorways of once bustling shops, each sight was a fresh stab of memory, a reminder of what was lost. She remembered the morning it happened. A Tuesday. The sun had been shining, birds chirping. Her usual morning routine, coffee, the news on the small kitchen television, a quick glance at her phone for messages from friends. Then the flicker. A momentary skip in the broadcast. She'd thought nothing of it, a minor technical glitch. But then the screen went black. Not just hers, but the entire building. The entire street. The entire city. The entire world, as they would later discover. Panic had rippled outwards, a silent, terrifying wave. People spilled into the streets, confused, shouting questions into the void. Power grids down. Communication networks dead. No internet. No radio. No explanation. Within days, the order had crumbled. Without power, without information, without hope, society had dissolved into a brutal fight for survival. But it wasn't the violence that haunted Elara. It was the vanishing. The gradual, inexplicable disappearance of people. Not all at once. First the sick, then the weak, then simply, everyone else. One morning, the street would be filled with frantic faces, the next, an eerie emptiness. They didn't die, not in any conventional sense. They simply weren't there anymore. Like dust motes dispersed by an unseen breath. She'd seen her brother, Liam, vanish. He'd been standing right beside her, arguing about whether they should risk venturing to the abandoned supermarket. One moment, his hand was reaching for hers, his voice raised in frustration. The next, the space he occupied was empty. No sound, no flash, no lingering scent. Just gone. The horror of that moment was a wound that refused to heal. It was a phantom limb, an ache she carried constantly. Now, weeks later, the physical danger had largely subsided. The few remaining survivors, if there were any, were as elusive as shadows. The biggest threat was the gnawing emptiness, the encroaching madness of solitude. She talked to herself, whispered fragments of old conversations, hummed tunes she barely remembered. Anything to fill the vast, echoing space within her mind. One afternoon, venturing further than usual, she stumbled upon a small, derelict bookstore. The sign, faded and half-detached, swayed mournfully in the wind. Hesitantly, she pushed open the creaking door. The air inside was thick with the scent of old paper and dust, a surprisingly comforting aroma in this world of decay. Books lay scattered on the floor, their spines broken, pages yellowed. It was a treasure trove of forgotten voices. She spent hours there, lost in the silent communion of words. She read about fantastical lands, about love and loss, about scientific discoveries that seemed utterly meaningless now. But it wasn't the content that mattered. It was the act of reading, the connection to minds that had once existed, that had once believed in something. It was a tether, however fragile, to the world that was. Among the scattered novels, her fingers brushed against something hardbound and smooth. Not a book. A journal. Its cover was a deep, rich leather, remarkably preserved. Curiosity piqued, Elara opened it. The pages were filled with a meticulous, elegant script. It was a travel journal, written by someone named Alistair. His entries spoke of distant lands, vibrant cultures, and an insatiable wanderlust. He described markets overflowing with exotic spices, mountains piercing the clouds, and oceans that stretched to the horizon, alive with creatures she had only ever seen in pictures. As she read, a strange sensation stirred within her. A feeling she hadn't experienced in 187 days, wonder. Alistair's words painted a world of boundless possibilities, a stark contrast to the constricted, silent reality she inhabited. He wrote about the beauty of human connection, the joy of shared experiences, the thrill of discovery. His last entry was dated 2 days before the event. He was planning a trip to a remote, uncharted island, a place he believed held ancient secrets, untouched by modern civilization. Perhaps, he had written, there are still places where the soul can truly breathe, where the echoes of the past whisper of a future yet to be written. Elara traced the elegant loops of his last sentence. A future yet to be written. The words resonated with a haunting irony. What future was there now? Yet, something shifted within her. A tiny, almost imperceptible spark. Alistair's journal wasn't just a record of a lost world, it was a testament to the human spirit's yearning for more, for exploration, for meaning. That night, back in her quiet apartment, the usual fear was tempered by a new sensation. A faint stirring of purpose. Alistair's island. It was probably a fantasy, a place long since swallowed by the inexplicable silence. But what if it wasn't? What if, somewhere, there was still a pocket of the old world, a place untouched by the great vanishing? The thought was absurd, reckless, dangerous. And yet, it offered a sliver of something she hadn't realized she was starving for, hope. The next morning, the stale cracker tasted different. The sips of rainwater felt less like survival, more like sustenance. She began to plan. She needed maps, even old ones. Supplies for a long journey. The city was desolate, but perhaps not entirely barren of resources. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, her scavenging had a direction, a focus beyond mere existence. She spent weeks meticulously preparing. She found a tattered atlas in another abandoned building, its pages crinkled but mostly intact. The island Alistair mentioned was marked, a tiny speck in a vast, blue expanse. It was far. Impossibly far. She collected what little dried food she could find, reinforced her worn backpack, and even managed to salvage a rusty but functional compass from a long-abandoned car. The day she left the city was marked by an unusual clarity in the air. The oppressive silence was still there, but now, it felt less like a tomb, more like a waiting room. She didn't look back. There was nothing to look back to. Only forward, towards the faint possibility of Alistair's island. The journey was brutal. Days blurred into weeks, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun. She walked until her feet ached, until exhaustion threatened to claim her. The landscape became increasingly wild, the remnants of civilization fading into distant memories. She encountered no one. Only the silent, enduring vastness of nature. There were moments of despair, of course. Nights spent huddled in makeshift shelters, the wind howling like a mournful spirit, the overwhelming loneliness threatening to crush her. She questioned her sanity, her purpose. Was she merely chasing a phantom, a figment of a dead man's dream? But then she would remember Liam's vanishing, the sudden, terrible emptiness, and a fierce resolve would harden within her. She had to know. She had to find an answer, or at least a reason to keep moving. She learned to read the sky, to interpret the subtle shifts in wind, to find water where none seemed to exist. The wilderness, once a terrifying unknown, slowly became a reluctant companion. She was no longer just surviving, she was adapting. After what felt like an eternity, the faint scent of salt filled the air. Then the sound of waves. Elara pushed through a final thicket of trees, her breath catching in her throat. Before her lay the ocean, vast and shimmering under the muted sun. And in the distance, a dark silhouette against the horizon, an island. Alistair's island. A wave of emotion washed over her, so potent it brought her to her knees. Relief, exhaustion, a fragile, almost unbelievable joy. But also a deep trepidation. What would she find there? Another empty space? Or something else entirely? Finding a serviceable boat was another challenge. Most had long since rotted away or been claimed by the sea. But after days of searching, she found it, a small, sturdy fishing boat, overturned and half buried in the sand, remarkably intact. It took her days more to right it, to patch the minor holes, to fashion a makeshift sail from discarded tarpaulins. Every muscle screamed in protest, but a new kind of strength had taken root in her, fueled by the distant promise of land. The crossing was treacherous. The currents were strong, the waves relentless. She battled the elements, clinging to the tiller, her eyes fixed on the distant shore. There were times she thought she wouldn't make it, when the vastness of the ocean seemed to mock her fragile hope. But she pushed through, driven by an almost primal need to reach that island. Finally, the keel scraped against sand. Elara collapsed onto the shore, her body trembling with exhaustion, her mind reeling. The island was lush, vibrant, a riot of green against the blue of the sea. Birds sang in the trees, a melody she hadn't heard in what felt like a lifetime. The air was fresh, alive with the scent of unknown blossoms. She spent the first few days simply exploring, overwhelmed by the sheer abundance of life. There were freshwater springs, edible plants, and even small, docile animals. It was a paradise, seemingly untouched by the silence that had swallowed the world. But more importantly, there were signs. Not of recent human presence, but of something ancient. Stone carvings half hidden by vines, crumbling structures hinting at a long-lost civilization. And then, in a secluded cove, nestled amidst dense foliage, she found it. A small, carefully constructed shelter, woven from local materials, yet unmistakably modern in its design. Inside, carefully placed, was another journal. Its cover was identical to Alistair's. With trembling hands, Elara opened it. The first page contained a single, familiar inscription, Alistair. Her breath hitched. This was his. He had made it. The entries that followed were different from the first journal. They were less about travel, more about observation. He wrote about the island's unique ecosystem, about the strange energy he felt emanating from the ancient structures. And then, on a page dated a few weeks after the event, a chilling discovery. He had found something. A device, unlike anything he had ever seen, hidden deep within one of the ancient ruins. It pulsed with a faint, ethereal light. He described its intricate design, its inexplicable power. And then, he wrote about the vanishing. Not as a global phenomenon, but as something localized, something triggered by the device. It's not death, he had written, his handwriting becoming less precise, more frantic. It's displacement. A shift. A transition. The device pulls them elsewhere. To another frequency. Another dimension, perhaps. And I believe it's starting to affect me too. His last entry was fragmented, desperate. The hum, it's getting louder. The world, blurring. I tried to shut it down. But it's too late. If anyone ever finds this, know that there's a way back. The device, it's a portal. A key. But it needs a catalyst. A strong enough connection. The journal abruptly ended. Elara stared at the last words, her mind racing. A portal. A key. A catalyst. A connection. Liam. He wasn't gone. He was displaced. And there was a way to bring him back. The realization was like a lightning bolt, illuminating the darkest corners of her despair. The years of silence, the suffocating loneliness, the gnawing fear, they all coalesced into a single, overwhelming surge of determination. She hadn't just survived to exist, she had survived to find this. She went to the ruins, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. The air around the largest structure shimmered faintly, a subtle distortion in the light. Deep within, half buried in the overgrown foliage, was the device. It pulsed with a soft, hypnotic glow, a silent invitation. It was larger than she had imagined, a complex array of crystalline structures and smooth, unidentifiable metal. She touched it, and a jolt of energy ran through her, not painful, but profoundly disorienting. She closed her eyes, focusing on the last words of Alistair's journal. A catalyst. A connection. Liam. His face, his voice, the warmth of his hand. All the memories, the love, the grief, she focused them, concentrated them, poured them into the device through her touch. It was an act of pure will, a desperate gamble. The light from the device intensified, pulsating with a rhythmic beat that matched the hammering of her own heart. The air around her vibrated, the ground beneath her feet trembled. For a moment, she was afraid. Afraid of vanishing, afraid of what she might find on the other side. But the fear was eclipsed by an even greater force, love. The unwavering, unconditional love for her brother. The light flared, blindingly bright, engulfing her. And then, silence. A different kind of silence. Not the cold, desolate quiet of the ruined world, but a profound, expectant hush. When she opened her eyes, the world was still vibrant, still lush. But something was different. The air tasted crisper. The light felt warmer. And then she heard it. A faint, distant sound. Voices. Human voices. And a whisper, soft as a breeze, yet clearer than anything she had heard in a lifetime, Elara? It was him. Liam. Tears streamed down her face, blurring the edges of the verdant landscape. She ran, her legs pumping, towards the sound, towards the impossible, towards the undeniable truth that the silence had been broken, and the future, indeed, was still waiting to be written.